evening. On behalf of the California State Firefighters Association, we're really pleased to be able to present to you tonight a panel forum discussion on the California Fire Service, particularly the Climate and Wildfire Institute. That's what we're going to talk about this evening. What we would also like you to do is, if you have any questions, we're going to have a nice presentation and then we'll open up for questions. If you have any questions, please enter those into the chat and I will facilitate that with our room of esteemed doctors. So I'm going to go through the doctor introduction, but I'm going to actually ask each of the doctors to introduce themselves. And I'm going to start with Dr. David. So David, would you mind please giving us a little introduction and bio?
Sure. Pleasure to be here. My name's David Saw. I'm a professor at the University of San Francisco, director of the Geospatial Analysis Lab there, and a principal in an environmental think tank called Spatial Informatics Group. Looking forward to chatting with you guys. Alex?
Thank you.
My name is Alex Hall. I am a professor at UCLA. I'm in the Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences Department, and I also direct a center at UCLA called the Center for Climate Science. And one of the things that we do that's critical for the state is provide high-resolution information about our changing climate in California. So it's great to be here. I'm really excited for this evening.
Thank you. Lara? Would you please do your introduction? Dr. Lara.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Lara Kueppers. I am an associate professor at the University of California, Berkeley, and I don't direct any centers, but I collaborate with these others, both in research and in working to stand up this new institute that you'll hear more about. My own research focuses on using simulation models to predict the future of vegetation and the effects of climate change on vegetation, increasingly including the effects of wildfire on our ecosystems. And I guess Ilkay is the last of our group.
Dr. Ilkay.
Good evening. Good evening. Great to see some familiar names here. I'm from UC San Diego. And some of you know me as the director of the WIFIRE lab, and we collaborated, and great to meet everyone here. My background is in information systems and predictive modeling.
Thank you so much. Doctors, we're really honored to have you all in the room with us this evening. As we in the fire service know, fires are getting hotter, fires are getting larger, and quite frankly, we really are turning to science these days to try and assist us. We all have those pondering questions that our constituents ask us. What are you doing about the wildfire problem in California? And quite frankly, as a fire chief or chief officer, we really have to look at science to determine what we can do to do a better job for our constituents. So we're really pleased to have you here this evening. And we're going to start with a presentation by Alex. Alex, it's all yours.
Okay, let me see if I can share my screen here. Let's see, how am I doing here? Can you see?
Yes, we can.
We can see.
Okay, great. Yeah, so thanks again for having us here. I'm here to talk to you about our concept of a Climate and Wildfire Institute. It's something that we have been collectively incubating for about a half a year now, maybe a little bit more. And we are, it's something that we're very passionate about and very excited about. So I'm really, it's really wonderful to be here and chat with you about it. So I'm just gonna present some of the impetus behind the Institute and talk a little bit about what we envision its function to be. In particular, I'm going to be talking a lot about connecting science to solutions, which is something that we've already heard a little bit about this evening already. So I think obviously very familiar with a lot of the problems that are posed by wildfire, and I don't want to belabor these points too much, but we have tremendous property damage with wildfire in California now with these mega fires, and we have loss of life, including professional firefighters, and we have lack of reliability in our electricity grid, which is causing major economic problems. We've seen really dramatic deteriorations in air quality. We had a month or so last year of almost unbreathable air in many urban areas in California, and so it's affecting urban communities as well. And of course, all of these issues are associated with huge costs, somewhere last year around $20 billion. So this is really becoming something that is posing an existential threat to the state of California and to much of the rest of the Western United States. And one reason for this is that we've been making some mistakes in how we relate to wildfire over the past century. We have been suppressing fire, especially in forested landscapes, which are adapted to a certain level of low to medium intensity fire. That really is a problem. It's led to a buildup of fuels in many landscapes, which makes fires bigger when they occur. We have been building in the wildland-urban interface, and we've also been changing the climate through emissions of greenhouse gases. And I want to talk a little bit more about that here in this next slide. You can see that if you look on the right, we've had a very large amount of wildfire in California over the past couple of decades. If you look at the map here, you can see that much of the state is visibly directly affected by wildfire. That's the map of where the fires have occurred. And if you look at the bottom panel here, we can see the area burned by wildfire by 5-year period. And if you look at this last 5-year period, 2016 to 2020, there's been a really dramatic increase in the area burned, and we've had some really unprecedented wildfires. And this is driven in part by a change in climate. When the wildfires are occurring, they're occurring in an environment that is warmer, and warmer temperatures lead to bigger fires. Warmer temperatures also dry out fuels more and make them more susceptible to burning. And so we have a number of impacts of a changing climate on the size and intensity of wildfire, in addition to some of the other factors that I mentioned before. And unfortunately, we anticipate that climate will continue to change, probably to a greater degree than we've seen already. So far, we've seen about 2 degrees Fahrenheit increase in average temperature since about 1850. And that will likely increase further by the end of the century, depending on what emission scenario we follow. We'll probably see somewhere between 4 and 8 degrees Fahrenheit of warming. So this is going to continue. And this raises, I think, very big questions about the future of wildfire in the state of California. And they're especially pressing given that we're already seeing these mega fires developing. So this is some of the context, and we got together a bunch of scientists, including many people in this meeting. We've been convening since the fall of last year to try to understand what might be done about this. And the proposal that we've come up with is for a new institution, which we're calling the Climate and Wildfire Institute. We are looking for a new organization that will effectively coordinate and act on the best available science and technology and work with key stakeholders across the state and beyond. The Institute will advance the state's understanding and capabilities and will hasten the development of emerging and innovative tools and policies. The idea here is for us to craft a long-term strategy to cope with the wildfire challenge instead of the current practice of just just waiting for the mega fires that materialize seemingly every year. So the idea is to be proactive, to do long-term planning, and to integrate science, policy, and implementation. The Wildfire Institute would sit at the intersection of the public, and by that we mean the public sector, and of course also the people of California, and also the tribal interests in the state are key stakeholders as well, and then their academic institutions, and then finally we have private enterprise, which also plays a role, which I'll touch upon in a moment. So the idea is to really convene all of these communities that each by themselves has critical knowledge and capabilities related to wildfire, and which now must be combined and integrated to create a holistic approach to the issue of wildfire and a changing climate in California. So I wanted to talk a few minutes about the need for a Climate and Wildfire Institute. We have a lot of knowledge gaps related to wildfire. We don't have sufficiently skilled wildfire risk forecasts really at all time scales, from hourly to daily to decades to and even longer. We just don't have those risk assessments, and we need them at very high levels of spatial detail. Our fire spread models have limited ability to model fire risk in the wildland-urban interface. We lack comprehensive vegetation models that really describe the unique characteristics of California ecosystems. And we need those models to predict how ecosystems might evolve in response to a changing climate and how they might evolve in response to changing fire regimes as well. This is a really complex scientific question, and we just don't have the tools yet to fully address it in a comprehensive way. We don't fully understand the trade-offs among the effectiveness, expense, and emissions of fuels treatment. And this is a really critical question if we want to develop the right policy for having the right fuels treatment in the right place. We have, in addition to these knowledge gaps, big implementation gaps. Our policies don't incorporate the inequitable impacts and vulnerability of people and communities. We lack, in many cases, the legal policy and governance structures for insurance, risk mitigation, and compensation. And this is where we can imagine the private sector being involved in the form of the insurance industry. And finally, we have coordination gaps. We don't have comprehensive models of fire, vegetation, climate, and air quality and hydrology that are totally integrated together and allow for information flows among these different types of models. We don't have policies that are fully developed and coordinated across different jurisdictions. So we have multiple jurisdictions and multiple governmental entities that are responsible for different parts of the landscape and different aspects of policy related to fire, and these are not always very well coordinated. And finally, we have an information conveyance and communication problem. When we have innovations in the scientific community, those don't necessarily get implemented, and our communities and our stakeholders don't benefit from those improvements in knowledge. So these are examples of gaps on the knowledge side, on the implementation side, and on the coordination side. Now, we might imagine that a way to solve this problem is to do good science, to understand how it might be implemented and communicate that science to the people who need it. And this is the kind of the traditional science pathway where we do basic research, and then the scientific community tries to understand how that might be best implemented, and we might call that applied research. And then we have some kind of a tech transfer to the people who might actually be using that knowledge. And then finally, that knowledge is used to improve decision-making. This is the traditional science to solution pathway. And what we're trying to do is generate knowledge, fill all these knowledge gaps, and do the coordination, and really revolutionize and accelerate this science to solution pathway. So this is our concept of how we have to integrate everything from basic and applied research and tech transfer and decision support together, so that we have a kind of a closed loop where we have people who are responsible for decision-making on the ground involved in the conceptualization of basic research. So an example of that might be very relevant for this group is that the professional firefighting community surely has information needs and surely has a need for more technical information. And a way for us to discover that is to communicate with you, to engage with you, to help you understand what might be possible with some investment. And then we could go and do the basic research that would ultimately yield that knowledge that might be beneficial for your community. So the idea is that we bring in these elements that are traditionally downstream of the knowledge generation very early on in the process, so that we have a cycle of research to tech transfer to decision support that is integrated. And the hope is that this would accelerate the implementation, the development of knowledge and the implementation of knowledge advances in the field. And this would happen much more quickly, which is the timescale that we really need, given the gravity of the wildfire crisis. So this slide kind of says in words what I just said, but the idea is to build an active and integrative science to solution pathway that will speed these innovations and not only accelerate knowledge generation, but also implementation of that knowledge and improvements in practices around wildfire. So the idea, again, is to integrate basic and applied research, tech transfer, and decision support from the inception of this institute. And that's one reason why we think it's so important to engage early on in a conversation with you all. We know that we need your community's insight into what's critical. So this is really necessary to ensure that the scientific information is relevant and it's usable, and that also it's something that is beneficial on a continuous basis. So this is the core concept, the core principle that we're integrating research and decision-making. So here are, here's more concrete examples of what we might take responsibility for. So if you look on the right-hand side here, rather, you can see on the x-axis here is a time scale from seconds to days to decades. And on the y-axis are spatial scales from square meters to square kilometers to 100 square kilometers. And you can see different elements of the wildfire problem here. So on the very short time scales, just predicting how these fires are going to evolve on timescales of seconds to hours. Obviously, incredibly critical information if we want to improve the way that we fight fires, and also if we want to save property and lives. And then we go to the longer timescales, understanding the relationship between weather, topography, and fuel to understand wildfire risk on timescales of days, perhaps even stretching out to months. Wouldn't it be wonderful if right now we had a very accurate picture of what the wildfire risk is going to be this coming fall in the heart of the fire season? If we had a detailed picture of that, we would have a much better understanding of how to deploy resources. And then finally, on the longer timescales, if we imagine thinking out beyond to decadal timescales, we also want to understand what the fire risk might be on those timescales. And that involves climate, of course, and also the vegetation dynamics and the likely distribution of ignitions. And our goal is to take responsibility for all of these spatial and timescales so that we can improve planning on timescales of seconds to hours, to days, to seasons, to decades. Now, just to take the example of this more weather time scale, again, this is just an example of how we might integrate the knowledge generation with the actual operations. The idea is that we do research that is very fundamental about the relationship among weather, topography, and fuels. My own research involves trying to understand how winds flow across topography. And that's an example of a research topic that might be useful in really trying to understand this relationship among weather, topography, and fuels. And then we would try to come up with our best understanding of what the state of knowledge is, given the various lines of evidence that we have. And then that could be used to inform operations. And of course, there should be an arrow back from operations to this original triangle where we do the conceptualization, because that's, again, how we envision this being integrated from start to finish. I've been implying this the whole time, but the idea is that we are co-developing knowledge, that this is not something that, that scientists can do on their own, that from the very start of conceptualizing research questions to the implementation of that knowledge in the field, there is integration of scientists and people who are actually using the information, that they are working together and that they're at the same table. And examples of communities that would be involved here, of course, are the ones represented here today, the professional firefighters, but also people in government, tribal communities, our students and our postdocs and our research fellows, people who comprise the next generation of scientists. We also have a training element here, and our communities. So we need everyone involved in part of the conversation from very early on. So to sum up here, the Climate and Wildfire Institute represents a partnership of public, private, and academic entities. We have a lot of people from the UC system, but also from other institutions in the Institute. Our goal is to be known as a source for highly credible information. We also want to be known for our ability to respond quickly to new and emerging needs. There is a lot of work going on in this general space, and we are part of that work in many cases, and we want to acknowledge that. We want to leverage it. The point is to coordinate it and to build upon it so that we can all be more than the sum of our parts. We want to be responsive to the pressing needs of stakeholders. We want to provide a collaborative forum for the co-development of knowledge. We want people to come together to discuss their concerns and priorities so that we can craft the right research agenda and get it implemented. And we are aiming to develop solutions in collaboration with state, federal, tribal, local, and private entities. We are going to be establishing regional hubs. Our first is likely to be in the Lake Tahoe area. The second one is likely to be someplace in Southern California. We are envisioning regional hubs because California has a diverse array of vegetation types and fire regimes, and the Institute needs to account for that variety and make sure that the local approaches are suited to the diversity of ecosystems and fire regimes across the state, and also acknowledging the diversity in our communities across the state. So, just to sum up, we believe that these new and systemic challenges associated with wildfire call for new institutions. No single community, including the scientific community, can solve these problems on its own. The only solution is for us to come together and develop the solutions together. So with that, I will wrap up, and I will join my other colleagues to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Doctor. That was very informative. For those of you that joined us late, I'd like to share with you the rules of engagement. If you have any specific questions, please write those in the chat, and we will work our way through that process. I have a couple that I've received earlier today, so I'll kind of kick this off to the group as a whole, and I'll just leave this as an open question. Are you aware of any other states in the union that have a climate and wildfire institute?
No, that's the simple answer.
No.
Well,
And Chief, there's a couple things just to build on what Alex was saying. There's a lot of coordinating bodies. There's a lot of individuals doing a variety of different research projects, and there's a bunch of different academic, bodies that try to organize information. What we're really trying to do here is, you can think of it as a skunk works for the fire department, is how do we listen to the firefighters on the ground, learn from their experience, understand what their needs are, then go back into our labs and build you guys what you need in a way that's efficient, meaningful, tangible, operational, and speed up that process and speed it up in a way that it has a funnel of the latest and greatest research piping into it and identifying where new research gaps are so we could fill it. It's to, like, how Alex showed that really nice timeline of what our traditional process is. With climate change, we're entering in this phenomenon of no analog scenarios. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. So we need to speed up the conversation, speed up the learnings in order to deal with it. And by having an institute built in and integrated with organizations like yours, we're going to be able to deal with some of these challenges in a meaningful way.
I agree. I was sharing with the doctors a little earlier that we in the fire service, in the structural firefighting arena, we would be trained early in our careers, and those that came before us trained us, and we passed that information along. And then came along the NIST, the National Institute of Science and Technology, and they started actually doing scientific testing in structural firefighting environments, and determined that some of the stuff that we had been doing for years wasn't nearly as effective as it could have been, because we now coupled science with firefighting. I also shared that many of us had fire science degrees, associate fire science degrees to get into the business, but we learned very little about science, and we learned a whole lot about everything else. So the bottom line is, obviously, when we look at what you can bring to the table, what we can share with you when it comes to the table, that is a partnership made in heaven. And quite honestly, that's something that we really need to embrace and move ahead on. I've got a couple other questions, and then I'll start taking some off the rolls there. What roles do you think the utilities could play in this? Obviously, the utilities are pretty prominent based on some recent fires that we've had in the last decade or so. So would they be a part of this as well?
Definitely, yeah. On the private sector side, the utilities are part of it, right? So if you look at the types of projects or research programs that Alex was talking about earlier, leveraging existing research efforts and programs, one of them is funded by the California Energy Commission. It's an EPIC grant. It's called Pyrogens. It's the idea behind it is to build the next generation of wildfire models that utilities could use to help them make improved decision making, whether it's public safety power shutoff, vegetation management, identifying where to harden parts of their grid. That's one interaction where there's a push into the IOUs. There's also a pull coming back out where the utilities are making massive investments with groups to put up brand new weather sensors and integrating new sorts of fire science technologies that they're making available to the research community. I know, Ilkay, you might want to speak to this. There's a bunch of different collaborations that are occurring. It's not only happening with the utilities, but that same sort of relationship is also happening with the fire lab with the Forest Service. The fire lab with the Forest Service is an integrated part of a lot of our research, where they're asking our broader group to look at their existing fire models and see, well, how can we upgrade them? What do we need to do to think about making them more current with the existing technology and the existing realities on the ground? And the hard part about that is that, I think Rusty mentioned this in one of his comments, is that there's a disconnect between when a policymaker making a decision in reaction to an event that happens versus looking at the data that's provided to them and trying to get the community, the science, and when I say the community, I'm thinking the broader community, to accept a data-driven decision-making approach that's palatable and easy to understand. That's hard, right? Because there's a lot of tradition, there's a lot of folklore about how to deal with some of this stuff. Some of it is accurate, some of it's not, some of it's changing. And I'll be quiet if Alex, Laura, okay, want to jump in and add.
I'll add, based on your comment about the utilities actually providing information to manage and deal with some of the crises. And one of those is actually, we are not just about science, but also technology. So creating the science and technology platform so we can collectively develop into it in an inclusive way and sharing experiences to starting by exchanging knowledge, but beyond that, on both science and technology to understand the opportunities for improvement. And in there, a lot of data, actually fire community is becoming a very data-rich community. You might have recognized it yourselves, but there's all kinds of information that's flowing into both science and also operational platforms. And most of the time, the information comes from a source without the business model to actually share the information. So it's being collected for a reason, for instance, by the utilities for weather or modeling of certain phenomena. And that information is hard to make it available without such a boundary organization or in a sustainable way to get the information out to science and operational resources. So the Institute also, in a sense, will tackle some of the challenges of sustaining information and the digital infrastructure for that. So it could be in a responsible way and sometimes openly, sometimes with some rules available to the science community. So more development in terms of knowledge gaps can be bridged. So for us in the WIFIRE, for instance, we also work with our energy company, San Diego Gas and Electric, and through what we developed called data commons. So these are AI and science enabled data sets, so to say, bring some context to data as well. The whole scientific community can have access to the data models, like weather models and fire potential index and others generated by SDG&E. Of course, it's not just the scientific community. We also integrated it with some operational platforms and tools that we are making available through the Fusion Center, but that's just one example. And the idea here for the Climate and Wildfire Institute is to create more examples like that, things that cultivated in the science and technology space to be collectively made available and sustainable in a way that brings stakeholders together. And it's very inclusive and transparent if we can achieve it that way, rather than being driven by one or few technologies. And sometimes those technologies become a lot for a little bit of improvement. And this is an opportunity, I think, to really make advances fast enough to catch up with the challenges of, as we talked about, climate change and human activity increase in the wild and urban interface. Now I'll stop.
Lara, did you have something that you'd like to share on this subject?
Well, I think I actually have a few comments that are more related to some of the items that have been questions that have been coming in through the chat. So I can wait until we get to those, since we've talked about the utilities and the technology a bit. Mm-hmm.
Sounds good. I'd like to direct a question, if I could, at Ilkay. Could you talk a little bit about some of the early work that's been done with some of the Southern California fire agencies on FIRUS and WIFIRE and the Fusion Center? I think there might be some people that have joined us that aren't quite aware of some of the remarkable strides the scientific community and the fire service community have made. And I think that they'd be interested in that. So if you wouldn't mind.
Oh, right. So WIFIRE is one of these research projects that we were referring to, started by the National Science Foundation Research Support. And the idea was really to prove we can use real-time information in the context of fire modeling. So during the operations, there could be models that are data-driven, so to say. And so we can understand rate of spread and direction as fast as the information is flowing, and it could be adjusted over time. So this research it actually was inspired by already another research project and platform called High Performance Wireless Research and Education Network. So through that, we had weather stations and cameras, mountaintop cameras throughout the San Diego County, and 160 of those cameras from 2007 on, I think, was installed by San Diego Gas and Electric, our utility company. They were building their models and things like that around it as well. So having this then information-rich test bed, so to say, we developed this environment that brings together all the data that's openly available in an information platform. So that information can be useful in the context of fire modeling, and we can automate some of those modeling platforms. So we were building these tools, right? We had the backend interfaces and some of the models that were, or workflows automation that was developed. Then we met Chief Terrazas at the LA Fire Department, and he was like, oh, I can actually use this. So we went to LAFD, and the setting is we are presenting this great big workflows and scientific models and integration to them. But then we're like, but how would they use it? Right? That was the first, what can we do to make these useful? So FireMap, one of these tools, came out of that collaboration driven by actually the needs of the wildland urban interface fires, or the wildland fires that would require really fast initial attack. And at the same time, Chief Hennessy was the fire chief in San Diego, and he was working with our General Atomics at the time here to create some aircraft so we could create a pilot program around Southern California to then feed data from the overhead sensing on the fires in real time to these models. So the information that we didn't have on, the real-time fire perimeter information that would be useful for these models were then suddenly coming from the cameras that were installed in HPR, and now Alert Wildfire actually extended it and made it really a useful platform. And from LAFD's helicopters, and now from aircraft that are highly sensitive and IR capabilities. Suddenly this grew into an operational platform that came out of the research. And, it was good, but it was a good problem also, because we are the university, and how do we make this happen and bring everyone together? So long story short, that turned into a public-private partnership that is now funded by Cal OES, which is the FIRES program, Fire Integrated Real-Time Information System. And the FIRES program now operates a fusion center that brings information from all these different resources. The moment a fire happens, actually the fusion center gets to have the information, and that gets modeled and shared through fire managers in the fusion center to the communities in different regions, and an activation line that can activate the aircraft. And this is operational 24/7 in high-risk days and 12-hour on regular days. So this is an example of what we can achieve together if we start talking. If Chief Terrazas didn't call me, or if Chief Hennessy didn't have the initiative, it would be difficult for us to go and ask. Right? We actually learned a lot from them over time. And for every virus, there's another one in a scientific environment that's waiting to be available. And the idea here is to showcase and come up with, or understand and come up with sort of opportunities to bridge these communities and come up with advances. And over the last 5 years, this whole environment has been operational and useful in over 100 fires, and reached out to many communities. And it made a lot of impact in terms of how initial attack is being done. I think Chief Meston can talk more about that if needed. I'm I feel so less credible to talk about initial attack and all of those, but it made a difference. This public-private partnership ideas, there are industry partners in there, like Intera and AVEX for aviation, who are also providing some of these capabilities. So,
thank you. I remember very distinctly when the Public Utilities Commission had a big hearing, and one of the things they showcased what was going on. Chief Terraza showed up at the event and was talking about the capability to map and to forewarn his citizens. And he showed the group at the time that not only was his firefighting resources attacking the fire, he was sharing that information with his mayor, and the mayor was sharing it with the citizens, and they were actually doing evacuations as to where to go and how to go there. So probably 4 or 5 years ago that event occurred. So you can see that science has really been embraced, and we're doing some pretty spectacular things out there. If you're wondering where the money came from OES, I can speak to that a little bit. That was part of the pre-positioning money that was gained back several years back after we experienced the Paradise Fire. Many politicians were asking their local fire chiefs, what are you going to do about the fire problem that we have, and what are you going to do to protect our own communities? And one of the things that we thought would be critical was to have the ability to pre-position local government resources like was done in CAL FIRE, and we actually expanded that mission to be an all risk or all hazard mission. So not only do we now pre-position, in fact, pre-positions have been going on today because of the heat, the extreme heat that's out there and the fire activities going on through the state. But we've also done that with mud and debris flow. We've also done that with civil unrest, and that aircraft that Ilkay was speaking about, FIRUS, plays a role in that platform in those environments as well. So I think we're getting better. I think the fire service community has been helped greatly by our interaction with the scientific community, and quite frankly, a forum like this is going to do wonders. You might be wondering, what are we going to do after that? I'm happy to report that this gang of 4 here, the doctors, are going to join the FireScope group in July, and FireScope is made up of federal, state, and local government fire agencies, and they're going to get together and have a discussion and open up that door so we can talk more freely and have open information exchange and learn what you can do for us and we can do for you. As it was pointed out earlier by one of our commenters, people on the ground, boots on the ground, they have a lot of knowledge, skills, and abilities that they're willing to share and want to share. And certainly from a scientific standpoint, you hold the key to unlocking a lot of mysteries that, quite frankly, a bunch of us ground pounders, we know things that burn and we know why, but some of the science behind that is still a mystery to us all. It still is. So it's really great to be able to see that. I noticed a question also in the area, kind of one of the $1.98 questions of the evening is, what about the people that don't believe that there's climate change or that science really is good for making some policy decisions? So I know that that's kind of a loaded question. I think we all probably have an opinion on that, but we would certainly like to hear your thoughts on that if you would be brave enough to tackle that one.
Well, honestly, I mean, believing in climate change or not believing in climate change, for me personally, I'm not here to try to convince anybody. You look at Portland, Oregon, and you see that the temperature is 117 degrees. We got to do something about it. You look at California, and we have a drought that's pounding down on us. We could see that right now. We need to deal with that. If you look at the trend of fire this year versus last year, versus the year before, is changing in ways that we could use our understanding of the climate and how it's shifting and changing. We could predict on it. We need to leverage that information. So for me, the understanding of our existing realities is not a political thing. I don't, people are welcome to believe any political ideology they like. That's not what we're here to try to change. But the realities on the ground and how it's changing our real environment is something that we have to pay attention to. And any firefighter who's been in the field and seen how these fires have changed over time doesn't need convincing. They've seen it, they've been around it, and they see how it's changing. And our big challenge is to try to figure out how to get our existing understanding of that climate and fuels and the interconnections between them, and quickly learn how those things are going to shift in ways that we haven't seen before, so we could prepare for it. You know, that's.
And David, just to tag along with that, we have many veteran fire officers in this group. I looked through the names, and I know we've all had the discussion on fires are burning differently than they did 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. I'm sorry, somebody else's comment. Alex, were you up next?
Oh, I was just going to quickly say, you know, I think, you know, because I'm of the doctors here, I'm the one who might be most from the hardcore climate community. And one thing that's been humbling about working with my colleagues and the stakeholders in the wildfire arena is how complicated it is, and how there are many factors related to wildfire risk that shape wildfire risk. You know, you mentioned vegetation management. There's human decisions about land use, the insurance policy. There are all kinds of things come into play. And, you know, I think we certainly, I don't think we're just about climate. We're about all these things. And I think we see climate as just one piece of this puzzle. So, you know, obviously it's important. I think climate change is important. I think the continued warming is a really big concern, but there are lots of factors at play here, and I don't think we should overemphasize climate either. You know, I think there's a lot of things to think about.
Thank you. Any other comments by any of the doctors on this subject before we move on to the next one?
Well, I guess I would just say, you know, I think there are, you know, a couple of different dimensions to this challenge. You know, one is a communication challenge, and, you know, whether climate needs to be a part of communicating about solutions that we might be able to bring to the table. You know, it may not need to be there. If our predictive models that include variation in climate are working, then we would imagine that they would gain greater traction, right? And the audience for those kinds of models is not necessarily the general public. It's going to be the people who need to use them to make decisions about vegetation management, for example, fire management, and so forth. And so I think, you know, there are a number of different dimensions to this, you know, the challenge of the politicization of, you know, some aspects of science. But I think really for us, the proof is going to be in the pudding, if you will. If we can achieve the goals that we're stating, you know, that Alex described here, then I hope that that the sort of aspect of it that incorporates what we understand about how climate variability plays into fire risk and vegetation change, like large mortality events, you know, it won't be tree mortality events, you know, that won't need to be front and center. It'll just be, you know, we are improving our understanding of how the landscape is changing and what that means for the wildfire challenges, including things like evacuating people so that they, you know, are at less risk when their communities are, you know, subject to heat waves and other kinds of things that really do dramatically increase fire risk. So.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I'm pleased to announce this evening that we also have some people from Fire Safe Councils on, which is something that's been around a bit of time, but they're becoming more engaged in helping assist their local communities and influencing policymakers to change policy. So I think they are a welcome addition to this group this evening. And thank you for those that are attending. Hopefully you'll learn something and you can take it back to your groups. There was a question about coordination with the U.S. Forest Service Research Station. Could anyone comment on that?
Yeah, so we spend a lot of time. I'm actually flying out there next month. And the idea is that the models and the tools and the things that we're using in California, the Forest Service Fire Lab is part of our team, and we're collaborating on a lot of this stuff closely together. The one thing that's unique about the Climate Wildfire Institute that's different than a lot of these other projects that we've been talking about, and I'm going to bring it up, I'm going to shift your question a little bit, Chief, if that's okay with you.
Yes, sir.
Is the way that we're delivering research. Traditionally, what we have is a research agenda, we'd get funding for it, we'd fill a gap in the grand knowledge base of science. What we're really trying to do with CWI is to talk to the stakeholders, talk to the people on the ground, talk to the communities, and ask, what is it that you need in order for you to have a direct impact? And go back to that body of literature, solution already there. And if there's not, mobilize resources to create that solution that's targeted at that need. So it's a needs-driven program. And using that approach, we're able to leverage things like the Forest Service, things like the new NASA missions, things like the new USGS land cover mapping efforts. That's the shift in the way that we're thinking about this thing, and where it's not run necessarily through a university and academic sector. It's run through a boundary organization that allows the flexibility to work with the Forest Service, to work with a local fire department, to work with a tribal organization, to work at a UC or a non-UC university. That's different. It's needed. And there are some examples of where this has worked well. In other major challenges, it just seems like fire is so complicated that something like that's needed now at a tactical level. I used the word skunk works before. To create a skunk works, to get that radical technology into people's hands to make a difference.
Thank you.
So if I could add to that also, because there's a good question, what sort of collaboration with US Forest Service that could add to it. The name of this activity actually is use-inspired research. So there's research, but it's really inspired by the use at the end. It starts by the solutions to problems. So, and the only way to achieve that is to talk about how research could be effective at the societal scale as a solution to an existing problem. And over the last year, actually, we've gone through, and there are some examples. I should first step back in the federal space. For instance, National Science Foundation has a program that's called the Convergence Accelerator. So they fund research groups like ourselves to then go find the next thing to do and create that prototype together with the users and the communities. And both David and I are involved in that. Over the last year, we've been having workshops, for instance, with science, AI, and communities of use for fire mitigation. And what we ended up actually discovering is some of the blockers for prescribed burns is the activity of creating the science in a way that's detailed enough that gives us information about, the ignition optimization, or where the smoke goes when you do a prescribed burn, or how the thinning of the environment would affect the behavior of the fire. So this is the basic research part of it. But to support that, we need to first understand how this could be used. And we work with Forest Service stations, multiple stations, and together with actually groups in the Forest Service, we have worked on generating the first 1 meter resolution, 3-dimensional continental scale estimated fields. So this integrates AI, this integrates field science, this integrates fire science. And we are now working on turning that into a practical tool for prescribed burn optimization collectively. And USGS is a part of it, National Park Service, NOAA, NASA for data support, and SDG&E for data support are part of it. So this is the type of activity we'd like to multiply. We don't want these one-offs, but create catalyzers for this type of activity. So we could collectively, what's going to happen in 2 years when we are done with the development of it? We'll look for how we can sustain it. CWI could be a channel for it. We could have industry collaborators, helping us. We could have agency collaborators taking some parts of it and applying. So there are all kinds of research like this. And I think part of it is to bring some methods to this type of activity, so we could be effective in doing it from the start. And I'll tell you, in WIFIRE, we've made many mistakes, right? We made loads of them because we were trying to discover how we could be useful and scale our use and sustain ourselves. So these are big challenges for the science community that the Institute hopefully will also help the science community to be effective in these type of collaborations.
Thank you. Anyone else like to comment on that before I move to our next question? So this is kind of a long one, but I'll read it. Is it possible in California to, number one, detect, number two, identify clear fire boundaries, number three, use radar to detect or ensure no human life is nearby or within danger? I'm kind of throwing a softball out there because I know some of these answers. Coordinate drones, various sizes, fixed wing or rotary, to deliver the fire location within 1 hour, or extinguish the fire, or at least significantly contain it to 10 meters. So who'd like to tackle that one?
There's a couple different programs, right? So there's the whole Fire Guard program, which pulls up the reapers and you know, using all their SAR technologies and thermal technologies. A lot of the stuff that you had is on the list to do, but like, you know, NASA's applied science program just got their budget doubled. They just got wildfire reintegrated as one of the thematic areas that they need to address. They were just mandated to work with the Forest Service to identify future needs of what types of sensors need to be put to bear. The technology and the science is there. If there's enough people asking for that list in a meaningful way, this sort of organization could mobilize that request to start launching that program. I know there's a whole new series of CubeSats, fire satellites that are going up to get better resolution of fire perimeter information. That's probably 5 years to 10 years out, but it's in the pipeline of information flow that people are using. And in terms of a stopgap between now and then, when that technology becomes operational, there's a whole spectrum of different things that can be put to bear. It's just a matter of identifying what the need is, resourcing it, mobilizing it, operationalizing it, and that's an effort, right? That's a conversation.
Anyone else like to comment on that question?
I just want to quickly point out that in parallel with the observational technology that we've been discussing, there's a modeling framework that must be built, and it involves high resolution atmospheric modeling. It involves land surface and vegetation modeling and fire modeling. We need that kind of predictive capacity, of course, informed by these amazing observations. Those two things coupled together are what will create our ability to predict and manage. So the observations are critical, but we also need the modeling infrastructure, and we need to build that and make it very complete and comprehensive.
Thank you. Anyone else? You can see that there's a gap that has really formed. There's the scientific community that can provide us a lot of information that would be useful to us. There's the firefighting community that also has a lot of information that is useful back to science. Then we've got the preventative component that goes along with that, whether it's the fire safe councils or the planners out there and where they put structures and all that. I think you've emphasized tonight that the Climate and Wildfire Institute will integrate these folks so we can start having conversations. I mean, let's face it, fires aren't going away anytime soon. People still like to build in very scenic corridors that often are surrounded by fuels that burn very well. So we as the fire service, I believe, quite honestly, need to now start promoting and sharing with our elected officials, who will share with their elected officials, that there is a need for this type of information for us to do a better job. It's no longer about what size hose and what type of nozzle we carry with us. It's also what kind of technology that we have available to us to keep our firefighters safer, to protect the citizens that we serve, and to be more efficient in our fire suppression efforts after the system has failed. So I think that that's really, really quite important. And there's that political factor, and we all are surrounded by politics, whether we like it or not. The entry-level firefighter up to the fire chief, up to the fire safe councils, up to the preventative divisions, the planners, the fire safe community, everything that we all do is political. And if we can get behind this and move this initiative forward, I think that that'll be really, really important. Can anyone comment on where we are with this and what the budget might look like in the state of California to help us along in this endeavor?
Well, we are optimistic that we're looking for, to get us started, we're looking for $10 million from the state in this budget cycle, and we're optimistic that we'll get that, although it's not set in stone yet. And we're optimistic that we'll get some private support as well to go with that to get us started. So that's where we are. I don't know if others want to add to that.
So in terms of getting direct funding for the Institute itself, you can tell by Alex's tone, we're still looking. But what we also have behind the individuals that are, individuals are beyond just the folks that are on this call, is a series of programs, institutes, and efforts where we really see the need for this thing. We're going to stay banded together until this works. Like right now, the implementation of CWI has been basically an ad hoc committee that has done this with goodwill, bubblegum, and duct tape. The idea is to get beyond that. The idea is to get this built into a more robust system where this information could flow freely through a variety of different institutes where it's not personality dependent. And we can start making those boundary connections in a meaningful way. So if you guys have great ideas, chiefs, any of the chiefs, chief, please let us know. Our collaboration and cooperation isn't dependent on you finding resources for us. We need that information, boots on the ground information from you. The research needs are something that we're really hoping we could collaborate on. But if there's a way to help identify resource mobilization and you have some strategies, we're all ears.
We know the governor's just allocated another $1 billion to wildfire in California. So certainly there should be some funding available. We're hopeful of that as we look around in the northern part of the state and the southern part of the state and the central part of the state, having active fires as we all speak this evening. So yes, so we have a few questions that are related to the preventative components of that: building code revisions, land use planning, homeless encampments, preventative type of measures. I know that we spoke a little earlier about the ability to use some science in how we do control burns and how we do those safely and help mitigate some of the fuels. Could someone comment some more on those broad categories of prevention, planning, land use, et cetera?
I guess I'll just weigh in briefly to say that while those of us on the call today are largely coming from sort of the physical science and sort of the more technical science side of things, the Institute is envisioned to be broader than that. We have core members of our founding group that work more on the policy side of things, as well as working to understand human behavior and how people respond to either wildfire events or sort of working better to understand how we can better address some of these challenges around land use, for example, which is, it's a policy challenge, right? And there are many others in the economics and other realms of social sciences, and those folks, health as well. So we have folks with that expertise in our group as well, because we understand that this challenge isn't just strictly, sort of a technical quantitative challenge, but there are a lot of dimensions to it.
Thank you, Lara. Anyone else?
Just to add to that, I mean, in order to address this at a level that's tactical, the amount of information you need is mind-boggling. Right? So if you really, I saw a few questions in here about the WUI and understanding how to build a new fuel stack within the WUI. If you're going to do that, you need to understand roof type of every building. You need to understand if they have vents. You need to understand if they have double pane windows. You need to understand if you have vegetation setbacks for each of the different buildings. You need to understand the flammability of each of those structures as they relate to our existing models, which is more art than science, because those fire behavior models they're not so quantitative, that it requires folks with boots on the ground experience to say, hey, I know how that one's going to burn, I know how that one's going to burn, and we need to translate that in. And there's some private sector partnerships that are developed where we have access to Zillow databases, and they're giving it to us, and Lighthouse databases, and they're giving it to us, where they have that resolution of information at 1 meter that we are piling in to improved, updated, standardized, Landfire-esque data sets for that next generation of CWBP planning. And again, if you look at like the genesis of where that workflow got set up, it was community saying, hey, I need this resolution of information in order for me to make a decision. That one was specifically hit up by the reinsurance industry. And it's one of these bubblegum duct tape conversations that occur that should be coming through the CWI. But there's a lot of this sort of stuff that's happening. And if there's an individual on this call that needed something like this, they should be able to go someplace and find out about it or ask for it. And that's where the connection is actually happening. The other thing that's interesting too, if you look at like the amount, like the level of resolution of data integration, and Ilkay's 3D map thing is amazing. If you guys have ever seen that, go take a look at it. It's basically taking the inventory data sets that we have across the country and voxelizing it, putting it into a 1 meter, 3-dimensional understanding of how the vegetation fuel sits across the landscape. That by itself is going to be needed for the next generation of models that are used. And so we could start understanding what that data stream looks like in our community for all of our protection plans. When you do a setback, what does that mean? When you thin from below, what does that actually mean? Then all of a sudden, the practice and the next generation of science, you have a coupling of that. And there needs to be a place for that conversation to occur. So there's a lot of these things happening, but they're happening in these small silos, these small vacuums in a variety of different conversations.
And the key word here is inclusiveness.
Yeah. So
anyone who would like to bring a topic up and, let's discuss this, $10 million we talked about, where is this going to go? One of the things is really spending the time and energy to come together, understand and discuss these challenges, and also co-develop some of these ideas. So I think, Chief Roper, hello. So there's a question, how and when the fire service can bring topics. It's like anytime. In that sense, the idea here is to have a boundary organization. So the topics, and set some, of course, processes for the topics like this to be available to for discussion, and to create events, gatherings, and information sessions from everyone, right? It's not science to operations or practice, but both ways. It's like multiple ways. I wouldn't even call it both ways, right? There's the industry involvement, there is agency involvement, there's all kinds of angles that we need to understand. So depending on the topic, inclusion of anybody who would like to be a part of the collective. What we want, I think, is proprietary and closed forums. So our idea is to be really open and inclusive, and to really use research or taxpayer funded or state funded research in a way that advances the practice as well in the long term. So that's the key, I think, in terms of what's being proposed here, so to say, to work together or collaborate. And one of the big parts of that is understanding. So this briefing that we wanted to do today, thank you, Chief Meston, for initiating it, is really about how we can explain the concept and get your sort of advice on how we can make that better or communicate that better as well in the long term.
And just to chain on for a second, I think if you do have suggestions based on this discussion, we're not formed yet, and we've been modifying our concept papers and our documents a lot over time based on feedback. And I think if you have feedback it's certainly valuable to get that to us. So we welcome that right from the outset.
Well, and today is the beginning of many meetings that I'm hopeful that the fire service will have, and we will move forward. And not only am I excited about what we're doing this evening, I'm also excited about what we're going to do at FireScope next month in a week or so. So I think that that's pretty exciting. There was a question about how would the CWI differ from the proposed Office of Wildfire Technology Research and Development within the State Office of Emergency Services. Anybody want to give that a whack?
I can try.
Okay.
CWI would work with it in the long term. And, you know, if there are issues, for instance, in terms of understanding a scientific or technological question, we would bring together the community to respond to those. And in some instances, we imagine there could be tools that need to be bridged to, you know, go from the purely scientific activity to something. It could be used at a center like this at the state level or any other organization that could make it useful. So those are the bridging and catalysis funding we would like to actually pull together. Because once that bridging is done and the purpose is set and the prototypes and pilot programs are achieved, the rest of it goes into the regular business as usual. And, you know, there are some, of course, well-known and to be established processes for sustainability there to be had, which the Institute also will tackle head on at that point.
And maybe I could just add a bit of it, because right now I am working with the Office of Emergency Services. Certainly the CWI brings in the entire university system within the state of California. Whereas at OES, it would be rather a small department that would make access to and coordinate with others. So we're getting from CWI private sector, public sector, scientific sector, some federal sector. So we get a big mixing bowl that's very large. Whereas at OES, even though it's a very large agency, this section would be rather small, and they would be dependent upon you and some of the research you provide. So I think that also kind of answers some of that question. So thank you for that. So we're kind of rounding down to the end of this discussion. It's coming up. We've got about 13 minutes or so. I'd like to ask each of you, if you would, maybe to give a closing statement, maybe to reach out to the members that have joined us this evening on how we might be able to help you help us. I think the collaborative efforts are really, really important. Certainly, we know that anytime you put an organization like the Climate and Wildfire Institute together, there's a bit of politics that's involved. Each of us has a bit of politics that we're involved in some form or fashion, whether we're part of a fire safe council or whether we're a local government or whether we're in the state system whatsoever. So please kind of give us a little thoughts on that, if you wouldn't mind.
Who wants to go first? Alex, you gonna go first?
Sorry, I'm muted. Yeah, I mean, sort of free associating a little bit from that and some other comments. You know, I think politics are at play, and you know, as Chief Meston said, in all things related to wildfire, there's politics. I think that, and you know, someone mentioned the public health emergency recently in COVID and how that got politicized. And I think that's a reality for wildfire too. I think our goal is to be an honest broker, to be an independent, honest broker, and to provide information that is as close to the truth as possible as we see it. And we want to be trusted. We might end up saying things and making recommendations that people don't like. But at least it's based on what we believe to be the best science. So I think there has to be a space, if we want to solve this problem, for some reality-based decision making, and otherwise we won't address it. And so I think, yes, there's politics, but I think there has to be space for people dealing honestly too. Yeah, I mean, other than that, it's just been great to engage with you, and we're looking forward, as Ilkay mentioned, to informally engaging with you, and feel free to reach out now if you have feedback. And then beyond that, I think we are looking to create structured engagement. It's not just like email us. It's let's create projects that actually solve problems where you all are involved on a continuous basis, and we are all kind of compensated to be involved. That it's something that's professionalized. I think that's the kind of level of engagement and collaboration that we're looking to ultimately have. So, yeah.
Well, we are no strangers to politics. Politics is life, and we are well engaged in that. So we don't shy away from that. Everything, quite frankly, we do is political as well, whether it's funding, whether it's emergency response. Look at those poor folks in Florida right now, the urban search and rescue teams. They're taking a lot of criticism for doing a phenomenal job. Not to get off on that tangent very much, but so thank you for those comments. Who's next?
I'll go next. I got a direct ask. You guys have to let us know if this is going to be really useful to you or this is just BS. I mean, to be frank, we just need a brass tacks conversation if this is something that's going to make your lives better. And if it is, and you have ideas for us shifting what we're actually doing, we're all ears. And if we're wasting our time, we want to hear it too. Or this is the next best thing since sliced bread. Let us know that too. We'll change the flavor of the bread if you need it. But we need open, honest, just brutal conversations with you folks to make sure we're on the right track, because it's confusing out there, and it's scary out there, and there's so much noise out there. Figuring out how to kind of get around that noise and to use your voices combined with our voices to make this need heard and acted on is where we really need help. And so if you're going to be around in July 7th, I know for sure 2 of us will be there enjoying libations with you folks. Hopefully more, 3. Please come and let's have those frank, open conversations. That's what we're looking for.
Thank you, David. Laura, would you like to have a closing comment?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm really encouraged by the number of people who joined to hear about what we're trying to do today. And I guess I was going to say something like what David said, so you stole my thunder a little bit, but that's fine. I think we all have the same attitude here, which is that the mode that we're in right now is really working to kind of set up something that we think has the best chance of success. And we need your input to achieve that. And I think one of the reasons why we've conceived of this as an institute that would sit outside the state government, and that would sit outside a university, and that would sit outside some of these other existing organizations, is that where we see a gap is in sort of coordinating across all these various entities and interests. Because there is a lot of great knowledge out there. There's a lot of great science happening. There are a lot of great technologies being developed, but not everybody knows about them, and not everybody has equal access to them. And so I think about, even county governments who are trying to, rapidly spin up programs to improve the way they do, manage their landscapes, if you will, interact with the citizens within their counties to kind of make their regions as safe as possible from this increasing risk of wildfire. They have just as much need for information these days as do professional firefighters or folks within public agencies who are doing planning. And so there's a really diverse group of stakeholders in this space, and that makes it really challenging. But if people have differential access different kinds of information, then it can get really confusing really quickly. So one of our goals here is to try and bring things together and really improve the crosstalk so that things can be better coordinated and people have more shared access to the emerging data streams and science and models and knowledge, including of how people behave as we go forward to meet these challenges.
Thank you, Doctor. And last but not least, the woman that brought me into the fold with all these doctors. And I've really enjoyed the time so far. Ilkay, we have a closing statement?
Yeah, I'll definitely say that this is a passion child for the community who is involved in the CWI. You know, all of us definitely have scientific backgrounds and understanding, and some of us are related to policy, but in general, the community here is really trying to help, willing to help. It's not the ivory tower project, so to say. And for me personally, as the technologist in this team here, my research has been applied to everything from, you know, cancer drugs and fusion reactors to COVID even over the last year. And by far, hands down, the most rewarding part of my professional career was the last 5 years working with this community and seeing it all unfold. And it was also the hardest because of politics and because of, you know, me bumping my head into the same wall over and over again. So it was a very difficult but rewarding adjustment on trying to make things useful and impactful. And I think this is why we would like to, and a number of us have these stories, we'd like to really expand this and make sure what we learn doesn't go to waste. A part of it is really trying to bridge in a way that we can accelerate and make it effective and create a culture of collaboration between different stakeholders. So we are very excited about this, and we are very excited and encouraged by potential support from the state to go forward with it. And at the federal level, and there were some questions on the international, we don't know where this will go. But I think there's a start, and today has been a great start. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you. And I would be remiss if I didn't introduce the president of the California State Firefighters Association and give him an opportunity to close out this well-attended and very inspirational discussion we had this evening with all of you doctors. So I'd like to introduce Eddie Sell, president of the California State Firefighters Association.
Good evening, everybody. It's such an honor to be here amongst all the doctors, and I didn't want to be totally outnumbered, so I brought my own with me. Dr. Michael Gurgis is on the call as well. And I'm also very, very proud to be joined by some of our committee chairs from the California State Firefighters Association. As you guys may or may not know, we are the oldest fire service trade association in the state, and we're going to turn 100 in 2022. And so certainly this is certainly the topic of our time, and those of us in the fire service are incredibly concerned with, you know, just obviously how bad the wildfire threat has become in California and the West, and frankly all over the world. So anything that we can do to lend our support and in this collaborative effort, I can't wait to meet you guys in person at FireScope. And certainly beyond that, I think there's going to be many different avenues that we can work together. So thank you all so much for your time and for your expertise and for your passion to something that's incredibly important. So thank you to all that attended tonight.
Thank you again.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. Stand by for more. We will post ultimately this video up on csfa.net. If you watch out for it, probably within the next 24 to 48 hours. Doctor, and doctor, thank you so much for your attendance this evening. I look forward to seeing you down in Orange County And good night, everyone. And Esteban, great job again this evening. Good night, all.
Bye, Chief.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Have a great night, everyone.